The latest round of federal COVID relief will give North Carolina government another $5 billion. What should policymakers do with that money? Joe Coletti has an interesting suggestion. Joe is Senior Fellow in Fiscal Studies at the John Locke Foundation. You wrote about this, and I really was interested in the first part of your recommendation here. You think we ought to send it back?
First idea: send the money back. North Carolina has where the federal government is sending down $5.2 billion. North Carolina is already sitting on a $5.4 billion surplus, and that $5.2 billion that the federal government is sending down is in addition to money for education, money for local governments, money for Medicaid, and a number of other areas. So that it's money that we have plenty. And there are rules with the federal money that potentially North Carolina would not be able to cut taxes until 2024 if they took $1 of the federal money. So yeah, the first best idea is to just send it back and not have it impinge any of our ability to make policy.
Let's delve into this, because I think a lot of people would say $5 billion from the federal government. You can't just send it back. That doesn't make sense. But you mentioned in your research brief about this, there are a lot of strings attached.
Right. Yeah, the first one is that if you take the money, it looks like it's completely unconstitutional, and governors are challenging it, and attorneys general are challenging it. But it looks like the law would forbid states from cutting taxes in any way if they take the money in the American Rescue Plan Act. And so that's with that significant string, that's a strong argument to just send the money back and not touch it, because North Carolina is well positioned to cut taxes in the near future and has a history of doing that and is primed to get back on that path.
One other thing that people might be thinking is, listen, we've been dealing with this COVID-19 pandemic for a year. We know that a lot of people are struggling. State government is probably struggling to pay its bills and to make sure we have the resources we need to cover people's needs. We're not necessarily in that bad a situation, are we?
No, North Carolina is in better shape than most states, but most states are actually, once you include all the federal money that has already come down, most states are more than adequately funded for this year, and North Carolina not only has the federal money, but because spending has been restrained the last 2 years, because the governor and the legislature haven't been able to agree on a new spending plan. We've been operating under the same budget for the last 3 years, for the most part, and our revenues, income tax revenue, had a big hit and had a big bump in July, because the filing deadline was moved from April to July, and incomes have been doing well, both on the personal level and at the corporate level, and sales taxes are doing fine too. So North Carolina right now has $5 billion, $5.4 billion of its own money that it has not spent. And so the federal money is just going to be piled on top of that. There are some states that potentially could use the money, but North Carolina is definitely not one.
Last line of your piece says there are few good ways to spend $10 billion in one-time money. That's an interesting way to look at this, the money that we already have in the bank, plus this new money coming in. This is not money that we would see year in and year out. It would be for, if it's spent, one-time expenses.
Right, and that's the biggest that's the other concern with this, is not just that North Carolina can't use the money the way that it would make sense to use, and can't use the money to help pay down pensions either. But what we've seen in the past is that the governors would use this one-time money, and we're seeing it actually with the money that we've already received, use this one-time money to offset state expenses, and then have to turn around at some point in the future and have to raise taxes or find some way to make up that difference. And we see this with there's a Medicaid provision in this bill as well that would reward North Carolina and the other states that have not expanded Medicaid yet by increasing the amount that they receive for the rest of the Medicaid population. And today there are groups on who support Medicaid expansion, who have been saying, well, we're going to get more money, and so this is the perfect time to expand Medicaid, ignoring the fact that if you take this money now, it's going to offset state spending. That state spending is not going to be returned to people, especially if you can't cut taxes. And so you're going to have to find a way to make up that money in the future while continuing the spending that's already going on. And so it's bad twice over in that sense.
Your first recommendation is send the money back. If policymakers, legislators say, well, we're not going to do that, give us some other ideas, you do also say that there are some not awful ways the money could be spent. What are you talking about? Right.
So the first thing is that this money needs to be more transparently accounted in the state budget. The UNC system has done a good job of separating out the money it's received for COVID-19. No other agency has, and so it's really hard to see how much money is being spent. So that's the first thing. And then the Pandemic Relief Office, which is in the budget office, needs to make that spending available and transparent on the website quickly so that we can all see how this money is being used. So that's some broad operational side of it. But the bill does specifically mention using the money for water, wastewater, and broadband infrastructure. Those are three things that the state has needed to do and has been looking to spend money on anyway.
Plus, that's a one-time type expense,
and it completely fits with the rest of the idea that it's one time that you're not going to, once you replace the water system, you're not going to have to replace it again for another number of years. And one thing, while the state cannot use the money for pensions, it can use the money to set up health savings accounts into retirement for state employees. And and that's an important thing because there's a $30 billion shortfall for future benefits for retired state employees, promised benefits, and those state employees who started in January of this year, and those who start from then on into the future, will not be on that plan, which is no different than most of us in the private sector. But if there's a way that you can provide some assistance, if the state can build up health savings accounts that will address that long-term $30 billion unfunded liability that they have, and also transform the way that state employees think about their health expenses and potentially bring down the cost for all of us.
Well, certainly very interesting ideas. And the first one, as spelled out in the headline of this brief, is send it back. And for not awful ways, legislators could use the next round of COVID cash. The author of that report is Joe Coletti, Senior Fellow in Fiscal Studies at the John Locke Foundation. Thanks so much, Joe.
Thank you, Mitch.